Awesome. Turn to Exodus chapter 4. Happy Father's Day to you. If any of you forgot that it's Father's Day, that was your warning. To sneak out during the prayer and go pick up a card real quick somewhere if you can. Exodus chapter 4. We're also going to be in a little bit in Exodus chapter 18. This morning I want to show you a man, a father, but specifically a father-in-law to Moses, a father to Zipporah this morning, and learn three things, not that complicated. We'll try to keep it simple since it's Father's Day. You know, you can go a little deeper on Mother's Day, but for Father's Day, we'll kind of keep it surface level for most of us guys. But three things that we can learn about being better fathers, father-in-law, or parents. And honestly, some of these things are interchangeable. In the course of the message, I might go back and forth between father, father-in-law, parents, but also how the rest of us can learn to honor and respect and remember to honor and respect those that God's placed in our lives in those positions. You might remember the story of Moses. Remember Moses? He was the guy that was a basket case. When he was born, he was placed in a basket and put in the reeds and a couple of you picked up on that. Okay, so here's the deal. So when Moses was born, Pharaoh wanted all of the babies to be killed because he thought that there was going to be this uprising, this threat against him. And so he wanted all the babies to be killed. But Moses' sister took him, and the mother took Moses, this baby, and placed him in a basket and placed him in the reeds, kind of in a swamp, in a marshy area. And Pharaoh's daughter happens along one day and happens to hear this baby, and she decides to bring this baby into her house, and lo and behold, they were able to find a Hebrew woman who could come and nurse the child, which ended up being Moses' mother, of course. And Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household, but then Moses, when he got a little older, he knew this whole time that he was a Hebrew. He was not an Egyptian like those that in the household that he grew up in. He was a Hebrew, and he saw some of his Hebrew brothers being mistreated and so forth, and he committed murder. When Moses committed murder, they were after him. They were out to take his life, and so Moses fled from Egypt into a land called Midian. Now, let me just give you a little geography lesson. Maybe you remember geography. That was that class where you had to get the colored pencils and color the little sections and hope you didn't go outside the lines. Well, Moses at this time in Midian is over on, if you're, golly, just go to the maps in the back of your Bible. You can figure it out quicker. But Midian is on the kind of the northwest coast. If you're looking at a map, it's kind of the northwest coast of what is now Saudi Arabia. And it borders the upper part of the Red Sea, and then on the other side of that Red Sea is the Sinai Peninsula. And the Sinai Peninsula is where a lot of the Exodus period takes place. Then the other side of the Sinai Peninsula is Egypt, right? You know where that is. Okay, are you with me? I know it's summer. We don't want to push you too much, especially balcony folks. I know it's a little hard for you. It's warm up there. The oxygen's a little bit low. So that's where we are. So here's Moses, who has fled from Egypt over into Midian, and in Midian he comes across this man who had a whole bunch of daughters, 7 in fact, and one of the daughters, the man ends up marrying this daughter to Moses. Her name was Zipporah. The father-in-law's name, Jethro. You only thought Jethro was on the Beverly Hillbillies, but no, there was a Jethro in the Bible. Maybe that's where the name of Jethro Bodine, if you don't remember his last name, came from. So this is where we pick up now. In chapter 4 in the book of Exodus, Moses has just been, now he's working for his father-in-law. That might be hard enough right there. I've never worked for my father-in-law for a job, and I won't go into that, but probably would be let go the first day. But Moses working for his father-in-law, he's tending his sheep out in the pasture, and God calls to him, and then God speaks to him. If you remember this part about Exodus chapter 3, where God speaks to Moses from a burning bush. So much to be said there. We're going to skip over that part today. So today where we pick up in chapter 4 is when Moses has just had this encounter with God at the burning bush, and then Moses goes back to his father-in-law, and he tells his father-in-law essentially what God has called him to do. So you've had all this time to get to the second book of the Bible, Exodus chapter 4. Look with me, Exodus chapter 4. I want to read verses 18 through 20. Exodus 4, 18 through 20. It says, Then Moses departed, meaning he departed that encounter with the Lord, and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, Please let me go that I may return to my brethren who are in Egypt, and see if they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. So now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, Go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead, those who were trying to kill him because of Moses having committed murder. Then verse 20 says, So Moses took his wife, his sons, and mounted them on a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. Moses also took the staff of God in his hand. This morning, here's what I want you to see. 3 things that we can learn about fathers or father-in-laws, and then how we should respond to them in honor. And here's the first thing. A father or father-in-law, interchangeably today, must trust his children into the hands and the will of God. A father or father-in-law must trust his children into the hands of God and the will of God. Let me just kind of break it down where we can understand it. If your kid comes home one day and says, God has called me to go be a missionary in Africa, what are you going to say? What are you going to say? What's your first reaction going to be? Because this was the first, God called me to go to Africa as a missionary. Remember where they are. They're over in Arabia. They're in Midian. And he says, God called me to go to Egypt. Where's Egypt? Egypt's over in Africa. And the father-in-law, incredible, you know what he normally would have said? He said, you're not taking, you can go. Most father-in-laws would say that. They say, you can go, but you're not taking my daughter there. You're sure not taking my grandkids there. But notice what Jethro said. He said, go in peace. Go in peace. The response of parents to children when God puts a call in their lives is instrumental in their pursuit of God's will. How we as parents react to our children when they're learning, they're growing in their faith. Listen, we can either squelch it. We can say, oh, I know that God stuff, really, that's just for Sunday. God doesn't really want you to obey him. And sometimes that's what we say. Sometimes that's the way we act by resisting it. Or we come up with all kinds of excuses about why they shouldn't do it or why they maybe should do that at a different time. Because down in the flesh, we don't want that to happen. But Jethro said, go in peace. And he responded in a way that fostered Moses' faith and encouraged him to follow and do what the Lord called him to do. Back in 1985, it was the summer. I was going into my senior year in college. And listen, there's a lot that happens in your senior year. It's an awesome thing. And I've been looking forward to it for 3 years. And then the summer before my senior year of college, God called me to lay out a semester of school and go to a place that I'd never heard of called Mankato, Minnesota, and work with college students. Now, you might have heard of Mankato if you ever watched Little House on the Prairie. Mankato's the big town where they used to go shopping. That's where the Walmart was, the Little House on the Prairie days. That's where they went. Well, the Lord called me, a lot of detail about how that all came about. But here's the incredible thing. That was like on the end of 1 week, and I had to go home and tell my parents the next couple of days, and then I had to leave like the Monday after. Like about 10 days later after this, from when I find out about this to when I'm loading up to leave, and I'm sure my parents thought I was nuts. I'm sure they thought I was crazy. And their first reaction, probably deep down inside, was, well, that's wonderful, but no, you're not going to do that. Or they could have said, well, you're already registered for school. Or why don't you wait until after next May, like maybe after you graduate, which would have been common sense reactions, right? You know what? I don't remember any of those reactions from my folks. What I remember them telling me, now they might have had those discussions amongst themselves, I'm sure they did, but what I remember them telling me is, you go and do what the Lord is calling you to do. I remember a later time when we had almost a similar conversation. It was in the year 2013 in the spring when I'm living about an hour from my parents who live down in College Station. I'm living about an hour from them, and I called and told them, I said, we believe the Lord's calling us to move 9 hours away to Pampa, Texas. And you know what they said then? The same thing I think that they said back in 1985. They said, you need to be where the Lord wants you to be. And their answer to me, their reply to me was go in peace. You know, had they ever responded otherwise? Had they said, well, you know, we're old. We're older. We don't want you to be that far from us. You know, that could have dissuaded me. It could have caused me to say, no, I need to wait. I need to wait until for several years before I do something like this. We're so close now, you know, why go all out there by ourselves? Because we were moving out here, just Jana and I, just the two of us. We would never again be close to family. You don't really understand how funny that is. There are like 75 of us that live here now, including a new grandson last night. Thank you. That was not a cheap applause line. It was just... But what my folks told me was, you need to be where the Lord calls you to be. Listen, I'm incredibly blessed in that my parents have fostered faith in me, that they trusted me to follow the Lord. That doesn't mean that I always made wise decisions, but they never tried to talk me out of God's will. They encouraged me along the way to follow him and to do what he was calling me to do. But listen, there are young people in our churches, maybe even this church. There are young adults that believe God's calling them, God's leading them in one direction, and the parents do everything they can to fight off God's call in that young person's life. Why? Because it doesn't make sense. Because it's not going to bank very well. Well, that's not what you've been planning on doing. Why would you go do something like that? That doesn't make any sense. You know, sadly, I see parents that will move heaven and hell to make sure their kid attends one specific sports camp, or to play some type of other thing, or to travel across the state to be in whatever competition. Yet they won't bend a half-a-day vacation to encourage their kid to go on a mission trip. Or they won't bend a little bit on their schedule so that the young person goes to youth camp. Here's what I know. About 1.7% of high school athletes will go to college on scholarship. Think about that. About 1.7% of high school athletes will go to college on scholarship, and most of those are not even full scholarship. Many of those are partial. About 1.7%, but 100% of people will one day die and either go to heaven or go to hell. And we spend a whole lot more of our time investing in those things that are uncertain, investing in things that are really on the 98.3% stuff, when the things that are guaranteed, we just pass on it. As parents, as grandparents, we need to learn this lesson from Jethro, that when something doesn't make sense, when something is dangerous, or something sounds scary, if the impetus behind it and the desire is to be obedient to God's call, we need to be all for it. We need to say, this is what matters for eternity. And hopefully you know me enough to know there's nothing wrong with all those other things. But if we prioritize all those other things over what matters eternally, then the end result will be young adults or grown-ups or when they become parents themselves, and their priorities will be so worldly focused. They'll be so focused on stuff here and now that really doesn't matter. But Jethro, and we'll see, he was not even a man of faith at this point. But Jethro said, go in peace. And Moses went and he took his wife and his 2 kids to Egypt. Let's continue on. This story jumps over to chapter 18. There's a whole lot that happens in between. But over in chapter 18, Moses he left with a wife and sons. He went back to Egypt. He told Pharaoh, let my people go. And then they head out to the wilderness in pursuit of the promised land. And you know, they're in this Exodus period. They're in the wilderness for 40 years. I mean, you think it's been hot here the last few days. I mean, just imagine in the Sinai Peninsula, in the wilderness, for 40 years. At some point, the going got rough. And either Jethro came and got the daughter and grandsons and took them back to Midian, or Moses had them sent there. But that's a good lesson for us to know that when you follow God's will, it ain't always easy. When you follow God's will, sometimes it's hard. You know, I told you in 1985, I went to Mankato, Minnesota, working with college students. Like the 3rd, 4th day that I'm there, I began my first of 5 days in the hospital with a kidney stone. That'll bless your heart. 1,500 miles from home and parents and anything that I knew. I thought, what in the world? And I remember talking to my parents, back before, we didn't even have flip phones or bag phones in those days. This is really the old days. But I remember calling them, hey, I'm in the hospital. And this wasn't when you could just jump on a plane and go there. I mean, everything's expensive. And I've never asked them, and they'll watch this video, I've never asked them what their discussion was like about me being up there in the hospital and them down in Houston when I'm so far from home. But they knew I was where God called me to be. When you go where God calls you to be, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Sometimes it is hard. This last year, because of some health concerns with my parents, it's been hard to be 9 hours from them. But I know the same thing that they know. What's more important is to be exactly where God wants us to be. Well, in chapter 18, the father-in-law, Moses at this point is around Mount Sinai, which is at the southernmost part of the Sinai Peninsula. And Jethro brings Zipporah, Moses' wife, and the 2 children there to see Moses. And that's what we pick up here. Notice in, let's get over to it. Chapter 18, verse 5 says, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was camped at the Mount of God. That's Mount Sinai. And he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. And then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare, and then went into the tent and continued to speak. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was religious. In fact, verse 1 in chapter 18 says that Jethro, a priest of Midian, a priest of the Midianites. Here's what I want you to see. We'll see this more when I read a little bit more in this passage. But Jethro was a religious man, but he was not a righteous man. Jethro was a man who had religion, but he didn't have faith. So the second point for us this morning is, fathers, don't just be religious, be men of faith. Don't just be religious, meaning going to church, checking a box, doing some religious things here and there and everywhere, but be men of faith. We know that because when Moses then greets Jethro, and he begins to tell Jethro all that's taken place that the Lord has done in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. Verse 9, verse 10 says, so Jethro's response to all that God had done says, so the Lord delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people under the hand of the Egyptians. In verse 11, he says, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. Here's what we know here. Jethro was a religious man, a priest of Midian. The Midianites were pagan. You might not know what the word pagan means, but in this case, they were polytheistic. They believed in poly, meaning many gods. We are monotheistic, mono meaning one, theistic God. We believe in one God. They believed in worship many gods. We know that by what he says here in verse 11, where he says, he's bigger than all the other gods. So here's Jethro, who was religious but not righteous. He was spiritual but didn't have a personal relationship with the Lord. Here's what fathers need to understand today. Religion alone is not the way to lead your family. Religion apart from righteousness, religious activity apart from personal faith is not the way to lead your family. So how do you do that? What does that look like to lead your family with faith? It means don't just take your family to church. Let them see you acting on faith. Let them see you acting in a way consistently throughout the week. Your family needs to see you Monday through Saturday living out the things that you claim to believe on Sunday. Are you with me? Your family needs to see such consistency in your life that when they hear you talk about God, it's not just a check the box religious ritual or activity, but they know it's real. It's real because this same God who's done all these things, he's impacted your life in such a way that you obey him and you live him out all week long. That's what it means to be a person of faith. So what does that look like for us? It means trusting God not only every day, but trusting God when it's good, but trusting God when it's hard. Trusting God in the trials. Your kids, your grandkids, they need to see your faith on display when it hurts. You're not really showing them anything when life is all easy. When you're rocking along on the easy street, well, you might talk about the goodness and the grace of God, but when push comes to shove, when the rubber meets the road is when the going gets tough. What do they hear coming out of your mouth? How do they see you act? How do they see you respond to that person that treated you like trash? You hear me? That's what it means to display faith in a consistent way. It means using teachable moments to instruct them. And this is a grandparent suggestion as much as it is for parents, for fathers and for mothers. Teachable moments, the drive time, the meal time, the family time, the hard times, the bed times, especially when they're little. Use teachable moments to instruct and to demonstrate living faith to them. Jethro, to this point, was not doing that with his children. Oh, he honored his position as a father-in-law to trust Moses and to allow them and to give them his blessing when Moses went back to Egypt. But other than that, Jethro was a priest of Midian. He was religious, but without a righteous, spiritual, consistent faith in the Lord. But then we see in verse 11 that Jethro's faith becomes a personal faith. He says, now I know. Right after this, right after Moses has told him all that God has done, he says, now I know. So third point that we as fathers-in-law, as parents need to practice this morning is the testimony of a believing child may bring faith to a faithless parent. And that's not just for those of us who are older to practice, but for all of us growing up. The testimony the testimony of a believing child may bring faith to a faithless parent. This testimony, and I'll close with this last point. This testimony is seen in Moses' respect and honor in addition to the explanation he gave of what God was doing. See, Jethro, the priest, father-in-law, comes to visit Moses. And if you notice what I read back over in what verses, when he first came to him in verse 7, he went out to meet his father-in-law, and Moses bowed down and he kissed him. Now, let me just go ahead and say this out front of everybody, my father and father-in-law included. We are a extend the right hand of fellowship family. We're not a greet one another with a holy kiss kind of family. And I'm not saying that we're going to go there. All right, we're good with. But what did Moses do? He went out, and especially in that day, the custom to show respect was to go out and to humble himself below this father-in-law and to greet him with a kiss. He showed him honor and respect. And because he showed him honor and respect, it was part of the package that the Lord used to draw Jethro into a personal faith with him. Now, if you were to go back and read, I don't have time to, but if you were to go back and read Exodus chapter 4, when Moses came out of that burning bush experience with the Lord, he went to Jethro. At that point, he goes to Jethro, and it doesn't say that he greeted him with a kiss and that he bowed down. But it does say it over in Exodus chapter 18. Here's what I think that means. I think that means that as Moses he's probably 80 years old at this point. Okay, you with me in all these details? Moses is probably 80 years old at least at this point when he's going back, or when Jethro brings the family out to him in the wilderness. 80 years old. At 80 years old, Moses had learned a lot more about honor and respect than he even knew at 40. You get that? At 80 years old, he had learned a lot more about honor and respect than he even knew at 40. Here's what else I know. We know a lot more about honor and respect at 40 than we do at 14 or 13, and a whole lot more than 12. Here's the point. We grow in our understanding and appreciation of what honor means. You never are too old to display honor to your parents. Let me say it again. You never are too old to display honor to your parents. And you know what else? Even if your parents are no longer here, the way you remember them and the way you talk about them should be honorable. And if you don't believe me, you'll understand that more and more the older you get. We never grow past the importance of showing honor. But here's what matters, is that Jethro saw the honor and respect that Moses, he's big time, right? I mean, he's leading Israel out in the desert. He's important. Jethro, he's just a farmer. No offense to the farmers. But Jethro was not, Moses had stood before Pharaoh. Yet he comes before his father-in-law and he humbles himself. Jethro saw that. All of a sudden, Moses didn't become too big for his britches. He didn't become too important for his family. But as he had walked with God and seen what God did, it in fact increased his honor and respect for his family. And Jethro saw the honor and respect, heard the testimony of what God did, and then Jethro, this pagan priest, put his faith in the living God. And that's what verse 11 says. Let's read it one more time. It says, Jethro said, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods indeed. Jump down to verse 12. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for our God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. That was a spiritual time of dedication, almost a kind of a worship service. This wasn't like Friday night supper that they had. This was a spiritual gathering that they had. Listen, I can close with this. Today, if you're here as a child of God, but your father or mother are not believers, they don't have maybe they claim to be believers, but they don't have a consistent walk with God, you know what you can do? You can honor them. You can show respect to them. And by showing honor and respect, you earn the right for them to hear the good things that God has done in your life. And you want to draw them into a relationship with the Lord? You want to draw them into a closer walk with the Lord? You start with honor and respect, and then you follow it up with talking about the goodness of God.